I don't know if you've seen the new movie version of Frankenstein. It's really amazing. And the story, the parable at this point of Frankenstein was really resonant when I was talking to my guest today, Jane Chen. Jane built Embrace, which was a company, a social enterprise. So it helped society while being a for profit business that created a really first of its kind, low cost infant warmer that has helped save many vulnerable premature babies, especially in places where the power goes out and traditional incubators might fail. And for you anxious achievers, Jane's story has all the external markers: Stanford, Harvard, Davos, global stages, big stars, big funding, even fame. And yet, Jane realized, I've created Embrace and it's killing me. And the business actually failed. So today, Jane takes us on her journey. She takes us literally on the journey, and she has done some wild things in the name of healing, from psilocybin retreats, eating frog poison, to traveling all over the world, to enacting her own family drama. Her book is Like a Wave We Break, a memoir of falling apart and finding myself. And that's what she did. I'm Morra Aarons-Mele, and this is The Anxious Achiever, the show that looks at the intersection of mental health and leadership and work and asks, how can we do it all better? This is a conversation about ambition and trauma, about when purpose can actually be the thing that's going to take us down a trap, and about chasing healing at extreme levels before realizing no one else can give you what you need except yourself. My conversation with Jane Chen. So Jane, your book reads like a thriller. Like I was always waiting to see what happened next. And I guess that's sort of keeping in point with your sort of addiction to achieving and being busy and even worrying, right? One of the things that hit me in your book was that the quest for self-help is a really good thing for an overachiever to do, because there's just always another modality you can try. Did you ever have a moment where you were like, oh, wait, I'm just doing the thing, except in my own healing? Because you tried a lot of different things.
Yeah. You know what? I didn't until the end, and now I look back and it's, like, kind of comical because I basically approached healing like a CEO, you know? And I threw myself into it with the same intensity I'd used to build a company, and so I was just running from one thing to the next, and that's why I now understand even the healing quest can be a form of escapism, right? Because it's like
Mm.
we're doing where we're relying on something external to fill the void that has kind of an escapist tendency. So I didn't see it in that moment, but I was obsessed. I was obsessed and I was gonna get to some end goal.
It's really interesting because you did go all over the world to
Mhm.
very unusual locations, and you ate frog poison, and you did all kinds of stuff. What do you think, what was motivating that quest?
I think I just felt so broken, and there was something in me that even at the height of my success, I felt this void. But once my company, shut down, I felt shattered. I didn't know who I was anymore. It was kind of the biggest failure I had ever experienced. And so all these things that were just below the surface really came up so strongly,
Yeah.
and I never knew that mentally I could feel so fragile. And this was the company shut down 10 years in. I'd lived 4 of those years in India. I had sacrificed everything to do the work. And so I just felt like a shell of a person. And it was kind of, hitting rock bottom that made me want to go out there and seek help and
Right.
resolve whatever it was that was, broken.
Right, you sort of go on this quest. Well, let's start at the beginning then. A big theme in the book is your father. your
Yes.
mother, your upbringing, a parent of immigrants from Taiwan. Orient us in that childhood and how it started you on the path.
Yeah. So I immigrated to the US from Taiwan when I was 4 and grew up in Southern California, where we were one of very few Asian families in the neighborhood that I grew up in. So often felt, just very alienated, both as a first generation immigrant. My parents didn't speak much English. And then again, being the only Asian kid in school and in the neighborhood, or one of very few. My parents were very strict. They're very achievement oriented. They wanted me to succeed, and they had sacrificed so much for our family to be in America. Um, and there was a lot of violence in my home. And I think corporal punishment is something that can be very normalized in Asian homes. And so when I didn't meet expectations, I got beaten up. And this was so, again, normalized in my culture and in my home that I never questioned it. It was just a part of my upbringing. It's kind of like a fish doesn't know it's swimming in water, right? So I never thought to question it. I rarely talked about it. I talked about it in the book. I talk about it with one friend and we laugh about it. Like it's so funny, right? And that's kind of like my awareness of it at that point. Um, and little did I know that that feeling of powerlessness through my childhood would lead me to want to help the most powerless people in the world. I did not connect these dots for many, many years, maybe 20 years. But once I left home after college, I worked with AIDS orphans in people of China,
But
and
not
then
initially, not I think what's really
yes,
interesting is that you didn't actually initially. You
yes,
went and got a really glamorous, fancy, high-paying consulting job,
yes, 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 yes. And my parents
which
had like really wanted me to be a doctor. 'Cause that's, like, the ultimate success in Taiwanese culture, So my dad would make me practice saying my name growing up. He'd say, "What's your name?" And I'd have to answer Doctor Chen, you know?
really?
So he was, like, brainwashing me from a very young age, and I chose not to, but I still went on this path and did management consulting, had a nice, cushy job doing that. I moved to Hong Kong, and the work was intellectually stimulating, but it felt hollow to me. It felt
Yeah.
very empty. So I did that for a couple years, and then one day read the New York Times, read an article about the AIDS epidemic in central China. And basically, millions of people had died through a unsanitary blood collection campaign.
Mhm.
So in certain villages, like 60 to 80% of the adult population had become HIV positive. And just reading this, I was like shocked. And something in me wanted to help. And I didn't understand why, but I ended up giving up my cushy job, became a volunteer for an organization that was helping the orphans who had been left behind, and did that work for a couple years, and that really changed the course of my life
Mm.
because I saw that I could make a difference. But as people would ask me, "Why are you doing this? Why'd you give up your job?" I didn't have an answer. It was just this fire in me that thought, "I want to help." You know?
You say
Um
that you had a conversation with a farmer, I guess, in rural China that just you said it unlocked emotion in you that had been held for decades.
Mhm, yeah, this was something I didn't have the conversation, I actually saw this, online, it was an interview, they interviewed this farmer, and I still remember it so vividly, this is, like, over 20 years ago now, and I just remember the look on his face, and the despair and the hopelessness, and the powerlessness that he felt, it was a death sentence, and he said that, he said, and I remember his hands were trembling and he's tears in his eyes, and he said, "We're just waiting to die." And there's something about that that just, it broke my heart, and little did I know it was touching upon me that sense of my own powerlessness
Yeah.
growing up.
Vulnerability is definitely a theme in the book and moments when you find vulnerable people, you feel vulnerable, being both extremely powerful for you, but also scary, it sounds like.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I didn't know how to be vulnerable, most of my life I disconnected from my emotions to survive,
Mhm.
right? And so if I when I as I was growing up, when I have a scene in the book about this, my sister was very vulnerable, and she was the one who could cry so easily, and it amazed me that she could do that. And so there are these moments, and now it sounds so mean, and I promise I wasn't trying to torture her, I was a kid, but there are these moments where, like, I would tell her sad stories and watch her cry. And then I would feel some relief from watching her cry because I couldn't access those emotions. It was too scary.
Mm. You to fast forward, you do have a scene later in the book, you're at, sort of a support group for social and people who work in the social change space, and someone says something about people who are traumatized working from their trauma,
Uh,
and it sounds like you kind of had a head nodding moment, and that a lot of people in the room had a head nodding moment. Do you think that people often who seek to change the world are motivated by trauma?
100%.
Yeah.
Yes. I would say most of my peers in the social enterprise, maybe not 100%, maybe it's like 99. But as I look around at my peers and social entrepreneurs, I see the same story play out over and over again, right? Our
Mhm.
our pain becomes our purpose and it becomes our fuel. And the shadow side of that is it becomes our shadow, right? And we work ourselves to complete burnout, and so that's what I saw in my own case, and that's what I've seen in many others, that you burn bright and you can do that for a couple years, but as you know, this work is very, very taxing in every way. And so it's not sustainable to work in that way. And I worked in such unhealthy ways building Embrace. I just completely wore myself out. And because I was disconnected from my body, I didn't listen to the signals. I ignored them. I pushed past all my limits until at the end of that 10-year period, I had a mental breakdown.
So you worked in China, and then you find yourself at Stanford Business School and the Harvard Kennedy School. You're
Mhm.
doing a joint degree. What was your goal in doing that?
In doing the joint degree?
Yeah. Well, and also in going to a place as hallowed as Stanford and Harvard and, you know.
Yeah. Well, the goal in going to graduate school is I kind of got to a couple years in with the HIV/AIDS nonprofits, and I realized that like it really showed me I could make a difference. Right, we were just a small group of people, and we were able to sponsor the education of thousands of orphans. But more importantly, we got the attention of the government, and there was
Mm,
new policy put in place that provided for covering the sponsorship of all students in all of these areas, AIDS orphans, their kind of, educational fees, and so I was really inspired to do more, and I also realized that I didn't have the skills to do that, and
mm.
I wanted to get more education, right? I kind of just, like, thrown in myself into that work and figured it out on the fly, and so I applied to graduate school, and I applied to Stanford Business School. I applied to 3 schools. I applied to Stanford, Harvard Business School, and then the Kennedy School. And and what happened, it actually wasn't a totally intentional decision. What happened was I got into the business schools first. I got into Harvard and Stanford first. I don't tell this story in the book. And, I couldn't decide which school I wanted to go to. I was just like I mean, it's a wonderful, dilemma to
Yeah.
be in, but I just I w I could be very indecisive, and I always wanna you see in the book later, I wanna try everything and do everything. That's part of my personality. And so I could not decide for the life of me what school I wanted to go to. And then I later got into the Kennedy School, and I thought, "Oh, what if I, like, combine the programs? Then I could get a taste of both schools." And so that's how that joint degree ended up happening.
Wow. That's yeah, easy path, right? But it is at so you're at Stanford, and then you actually there was a very charming scene in the book that I could really relate to where you're about to give your first sort of public speech and you have a blackout. You
Mhm.
have a panic
Yeah.
attack.
Yep.
That has happened to me, and it's one of the most mortifying. Were you able to sort of bring it back together and finish out your speech, though?
Yeah, and I d oh, so I did, but it was mortifying because once I got to Stanford, I felt like the biggest imposter. Like, I was
Yeah.
just sure I was admissions mistake, and it was a matter of time before everyone found out, that I didn't belong there, and so I just yeah, was so anxious as I got into Stanford, and I was asked to do a talk about my HIV/AIDS work for World AIDS Day, and so there was a student-run kind of talk series that happened once a month, and I was so nervous going into that, and so I prepared and prepared and prepared, got in front of this room of maybe it was like 50 students, and by the 3rd slide, I blacked out, and I
Yeah.
had never experienced anything like that where I literally could not think of the next word to say. It was just a blank screen, and I kind of freaked out, and I left the room, and I thought, "There's no way. I can't finish that talk," but a friend came after me and kind of calmed me down, and I went back in and I finished the talk, and afterwards, many people said, it was the best talk they heard all year, and I heard these
Wow.
but I was so mortified, and I was just actually reflecting on this a couple days ago. Um, I never thought about the part where I finished the talk. I didn't give myself any credit or recognition for the fact that I had gone back in and finished the talk.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
Which is huge, but my mind went to, "Oh, you fucked up, and now everyone knows that you don't belong here," and this public speaking fear ended up plaguing me for years. It took me probably 13 years to get over this. And I finally did, and I can tell that story later because it's not in the book, but it relates to the end of the book and everything I learned in the book that I was finally able to overcome that. But for years afterwards, just standing up in front of a classroom and saying, "My name is Jane," set me off on the verge of a panic attack just doing
Did you
that.
hear your father's voice telling you you're stupid? Because that's also a huge theme in the book. He has a phrase, and I'm not going to
Yeah.
attempt to pronounce it in Taiwanese, basically saying you're so stupid.
Yeah.
What
Yeah, 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 yeah. It wasn't I mean, it'd become my own voice at that point,
yeah.
but I grew up with my father constantly telling me how stupid I was, and so I really believe that. I really believe that, and I really even after these fancy degrees, I had to really seek professional help to believe that I wasn't stupid. And it's just the things that you hear your whole life, they get so ingrained that you don't know what is yours anymore and what's someone else's voice,
No.
right? And so, I did very much believe that, and I think maybe more than that, it was the shame around being seen as incompetent, and the shame that, or the fear that I was being judged, right? And
Mm.
that comes both from the upbringing and also I think is my experience as a first generation Asian and immigrant,
Mhm.
right? You don't wanna be judged, and you don't wanna stand out for bad reason. So there's a lot that went into that, but, I battled that fear for many, many years after.
I call it the voice, and it is,
Mm.
it's so layered into who you are. And so later I wanna talk also a little bit about your internal family systems work and see peel out how if that helped, because I think the audience would find that instructive and will come don't let me forget to come around to how you got over your
Yes,
fear of public
yes, yes,
speaking.
yes, yes.
Um, because at one point you went and pitched a big foundation for funding for your startup, and basically the funder said, "She's not a CEO," and wanted your male counterpart to be CEO.
Yes, yeah, I was so nervous, and this was, like, when I was still really struggling with the public speaking thing, and so we had this big opportunity with a big foundation. My co-founder and I went in, and we pitched, and, I just was so nervous. I stumbled on my words. I'm sure I didn't come across very confidently, and so she came back to us, and she said she believed he should be the CEO and not me.
Mhm.
Oh, and that was crushing. I mean, I already had so much self-doubt. Yeah, and I didn't really at that point, this is now 2008, I actually didn't have the gender lens to look at that through.
Oh,
I thought
interesting.
yeah, like, it didn't occur to me that, "Oh, he's a man." I just thought, "Oh, of course, he's way more competent than me," you know? Um Yeah, but luckily, my team and my board, I'm so grateful. They stood behind me and they said, "We won't take that money then." And no one kind of believed in what she said or even asked us to reconsider, my position. So I'm just so grateful that they had that belief in me.
So tell us a little bit about your startup, Embrace, which started in a class, right at the Stanford Design School. Yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, so Embrace came about my first year at Stanford. I learned about a class called Design for Extreme Affordability. And it brought together students of all the different graduate schools with the goal of creating low cost technologies for people in the developing world. And when I learned about this class, I just was so excited about it. And I remember thinking, "Oh, this is the reason I came to Stanford." And so I took the course, I signed up for it, and one of the challenges, there's different challenges that you could work on. And one of them that year was to build a baby incubator that costs
Mm,
1% of a traditional incubator.
wow.
And so I teamed up with 3 other graduate school students, who were all amazing. There was another business school student and then 2 from the engineering schools. And we came together and we ended up developing this product. We did research. It was actually in India, Nepal, and we developed this product. And the key thing was a product that could work without constant electricity. That is really what differentiated what we did from anyone else. And that insight came about because early in the research, we saw that um, donated incubators in hospital settings didn't really work because there were so many electricity outages and often people had no idea how to use them. And then we met a woman in a village who had lost her baby because she couldn't even get to a hospital. And so that was kind of the real breakthrough moment or the insight that made us think, okay, this isn't just for a traditional hospital setting. We need to make something that can be used in a village or even in a home, which means it has to be portable, super easy to use, and work without constant electricity. So that led us to design the Embrace incubator, which looks like a little sleeping bag for a baby. The core technology is what's called a phase change material. So it's a wax like substance that, when melted, maintains 98 degrees. That's what these babies need to be kept at for up to 6 hours at a stretch. And you simply reheat it every 6 hours. We provide a heater that goes along with it. And that is enough to create that stable microclimate for the baby. Yeah, so
So
very,
it's
very
amazing.
simple. Yeah.
You make it and then you graduate.
Yes,
And
graduate.
instead of choosing to go make a gazillion dollars to work at Google or whatever, like probably a lot of Stanford Business School graduates do, you decide to make a go of this social enterprise.
Yeah, and it's interesting, yeah, because none of us
But
expected that was gonna happen.
how did you had you already gotten funding by then, or did you have an indication that you were gonna be able to make a go of this?
No, we hadn't gotten any funding. We did apply to, one of my co-founders encouraged us to apply to, like, a 60-second elevator pitch, and so he represented us, and we won that competition, so I think we got, like,
Yeah.
$2,000. And that was what gave us the belief that, we could do this, that $2,000, and so we ended up applying to all these business plan competitions all around the country. We lost all of them, and the last, week of school, I hadn't looked for any other jobs. We had no funding. I was like, "Oh, wow." I didn't have a plan B. And so the very last week of school, we ended up getting 2 bits of funding. One was the Echoing Green Fellowship,
Mm,
and that's for early stage social entrepreneurs. So grateful for that. That gave us, I think, our first $90,000 over like 2 years. And then we won the Stanford business plan competition. And so we finally
wow.
had our first like kind of little bit of money, and Echoing Green required that if we got the funding, we would have to do this for 2 years. It was a 2-year so that's what kind of made it very real. And, my
Hmm.
co-founder Rahul and I said, "Okay, we're gonna do this." And I was gonna be the CEO, he was gonna be this chief technology officer, and it was just the 2 of us. And then eventually Linus, our 3rd co-founder, he was making heaps of money doing, like, video game, programming and all of that, but as he watched us, he thought, "Oh, wow, I'm gonna join you guys too." And so he
Wow.
came along, and then there was a 4th, person in the class who had originally been part of a different project. He decided to join us as well, and the 4 of us together said, "We're gonna move to India and do this."
And the way that you describe your time in India growing this is both exciting and terrifying because basically it sounds like it was hell. The working conditions, the pace that you had to work at was so draining, but also it must have been so exciting because you became, certainly in the social impact world, you kind of famous. Like it was a big deal. Like you were on stage with Bill Clinton and it was very, it must have been exhilarating and very terrifying at the same time.
Yeah, that's a perfect way that you captured it. That's exactly it. I think being in India, and we didn't know that any of those accolades were gonna come, that never
Uh,
even crossed my mind going into this. We were just doing the work, and so, I moved there, and pretty immediately, it was very, very challenging and very, very exhausting, and I had lived in other countries before. I had done work with the Clinton Foundation in Tanzania. I'd done HIV/AIDS work there. I'd traveled a ton. So traveling in new cultures and new places was not foreign to me. It was not alien to me. Yet living in India, wow, that really was another thing. And I think it's not just living there, it's trying to build a company in a
mhm,
place like that, where the infrastructure is very broken. There's a lot of corruption. Nothing is straightforward. Like crossing the street is not easy in India, okay? Like nothing is easy in India. And it was chaotic. And so we're trying
mhm,
to like build a technology to figure out like clinical testing. It's a medical device, right? So clinical testing, figuring out regulatory, figuring out manufacturing in this crazy chaotic environment. It was wow, it was really exhausting in a way that I had never anticipated.
wow. Why did you go to India to build it?
So India's home to 40% of all the world's premature babies. 1 out of
Oh.
every 3 premature babies is born in India. So we thought we need to go straight to where the problem is.
Mhm,
And design thinking had really taught us that empathy is the crux of great design, right? If you wanna build a great product, you need to understand your customers. And so we thought there's no way we could keep developing this product sitting in this little bubble at Stanford. We have to go be with the people we're trying to serve and
mm,
breathe the air they're breathing, live, the lives they're living. And so we did that. We went there and we spent the next 3 years developing and fine tuning our product. So we would go into the field and test every feature of the product with doctors, nurses, healthcare workers, moms, and then we then had to figure out, well, how are we going to get this out there, right? What's the business strategy? What's the distribution strategy? Meanwhile, we had to keep the lights on. So I was like flying back to the US every 6 weeks to try to raise more money, and there are very few nonprofits, at least at that time, that were also building products. So that
mhm,
was new, and that was part of our journey. Eventually, we ended up also spinning out a for-profit arm, and we can talk about that later, but part of this was, like, figuring out what is the right business model to sustain this, right? And so there was just so much to figure out, and the living conditions themselves were so taxing. I remember to do
mm,
research, like, when we'd go to this village, and I'd go solo sometimes, it was, like, 4 or 5 hours away. So I'd wake up, leave at 5 AM, go in a car for, like, 5 hours to go do research, spend the day there, and then come back that night, and there were, like many of my days were like that. So it was yeah, it was a lot, and I felt exhausted pretty soon, pretty quickly. We had thought we were gonna be there for a year. That would take us a
mm,
year to refine, launch the product, etcetera. It took 4 years. Yeah, it took 4 years, and at the 4-year period, we still had barely scratched the iceberg, and at that point, we had launched the product, and we had started to save babies, and, we had gotten our product into government hospitals in 10 states across India, so we did we had achieved a lot, but I would say it came at a big personal cost.
And then what was the tipping point where people you started getting invited to Davos and, becoming, almost a spokesperson in a way for social impact. What
Yeah.
did you when that started to happen, did you think, "Oh, I've done it." I mean, what no?
Not at all. Well, remember, I was still battling my public speaking fear, right? And
Okay.
so, um, I think the tipping point came fairly early on, and it was probably becoming a TED Fellow.
Ah, interesting.
So that was really interesting. So, again, this is a story I don't tell in the book, but right before I graduated from Stanford, a friend encouraged me to do this, to send a note to all of our classmates telling them what I was up to and seeing if anyone might want to support. And it was so smart. I'm so glad she
Wow.
told me to
That's
do
a
that.
very brave thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So I did it. And I remember one person connected me to one of his investors who had been a donor to the TED program and who had helped like donate to the TED Fellows program. And that's how I learned about that. And so I
Huh.
applied and was accepted. And then I had the opportunity to do a talk. Now, back then, fellows only did talks in front of other fellows. I think it was like their first fellowship year. And I think mine might have been one of the first fellows talks to go on TED.com. And that was really a turning point for us
Mhm.
because then it got, we had visibility, we had people who wanted to fund us. I remember even being in a village in India in a government office, and they had watched the TED Talk.
Oh
That's
my god.
it was so crazy. So that's kind of what catapulted us into that world.
I just wanna pause here because I think it's so illustrative that on that your outside probably didn't match your inside.
Yeah,
I
100.
mean, like a star on TED and inside, like, how was your anxiety?
It was terrible. I was taking beta blockers, so that's a medicine to help with, like, the physical symptoms of anxiety, of public speaking. A lot of performers, take them, and I was relying on those to get through any kind of big public appearances like this, and on the inside, I felt just constantly anxious that, like, the thread could unravel at any moment. I was trying to juggle so many things. I had so much responsibility and the toll of the work, it meant so much to me, and this is what's interesting, and it was hard to kind of separate this out in the writing, but a part of me just, like, deeply believed in the purpose and cared so much. Like, I felt for these women and families. Their stories would haunt me at night, and that was part of the drive that I just cared so much. And part of that was, kind of because of my own trauma from the way I grew up. And then there was a part of me that was so achievement oriented that once I set a goal, I needed to reach that goal. And this is what I love about parts work is we're all complicated. We all have many motivations, right? And so I think there are these two parts of me that were so intense, the part that just cared so deeply and I was not going to give up at any cost. And then there's the part of me that's also like very ambitious and achievement oriented and needed to kind of like prove my worth somehow through my work. And so those two together, gosh, they made a really good team, right?
Whew. That's a I mean, it's unstoppable, and I don't mean
Yes,
that in a good way.
right, right. No. And
Always.
so, yeah, I remember on my personal goal list for years, it was like sleep 6 hours a night. And when I went back one year, I had this moleskin notebook and I'd have a page of my personal things I needed to take care of and a page of all the embrace related things. I went back one time and I looked at that. The personal list never changed for a year because none of those things got done. Every day, same thing showed up because my mantra was embrace first and me
Embrace
second.
first.
And it was get the company to safe harbor, get us to a point where it's sustainable. You could find someone else to take over, and then you could take a break.
You have the most heart one of the most heartbreaking moments is when you think you're there. Because despite all your success and you raised a bunch of money, you things were never easy. You were always trying to get and so finally, I want you to tell it, you
Yeah.
think you found the way out. A huge corporation is going
Yeah.
to absorb you, and then what happened?
Yeah, so finally, I'm like, "Wow, we got to the finish line." We had this multinational medical device company came in, wanted to become our global distributor and put in the next round of funding, and
Because
I'm
basically just tell us why, because even though it was so successful and
yes,
the product worked,
yes,
why did it not
yes,
as a
okay.
business work?
Yes, 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 good point. So we quickly realized that the economics of this did not work. So we spun out the for-profit arm, and the reason for that was because there was all the impact investors were starting to emerge
Mhm.
at that point, right? The investors who wanted to invest in companies that also had purpose, and some of them came to us and they said, if you had a
Triple
for-profit
bottom line?
triple bottom line. Yes, 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 yes. And they said if you had a for profit, then we could invest, right? And so we decided to spin out a for profit arm. The idea being the for profit could attract private capital and could
Mhm.
sell the product to governments and to private clinics and so on. And the nonprofit could keep taking donations to give away the product for free,
Got it,
right?
got it.
Seems straightforward,
Right,
was
makes a
not
lot
at
of sense.
all, right? Makes sense, but it was, like, way more complicated to execute than we had anticipated. But on the for-profit side, we quickly realized the economics of this did not make sense, for us to manufacture and distribute a single product on our
So
own, right? The private sector was too fragmented, so the cost of distribution becomes very, very high. Like, we were literally going door to door to doctors' offices to show them the product
oh my
and
goodness.
yeah. Yeah, so the largest hospital chain in India, maybe there's like 10 of them, and everything else is solo practitioners, right? So you could imagine that the cost
Yeah.
of sales and distribution becomes very high, which meant we had to rely on the government. The government became our single largest customer, and those contracts are very difficult. They happen through a tender process, and we were successful in getting some of those. But then you get an election year, and health ministers change hands and you kinda go back to square one, and so just it was very, very, very difficult to create a financially sustainable business when we are a tiny company with, such little reach, and we knew we needed to expand to markets beyond India to have this make sense. And so we thought our prayers were answered when this company came in and they already had global distribution, it's a multi-billion dollar company, and they were looking for products for developing countries, for emerging markets, and they loved our product. So we worked on this deal with for 9 months. We worked on this deal, and it was so exciting. Like I planned a sabbatical afterwards. I found a new CEO at that point, and I had moved back to the U.S. after 4 years. And it was like, we did it. I thought we were going to cross that finish line. And then right before we signed the paperwork, the, CEO of that healthcare company stepped down, and she had been the main advocate for the deal. And so within days, they pulled the plug on the whole thing. Now at that point, because the deal had taken much longer to, like, finish than we had expected with all the legal stuff and paperwork and everything, at that point, we had, like, 7 days of cash left in the bank.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
We had taken out 2 loans to get us to the finish line, and we didn't have any money left, and so when this happened, I was just devastated, and everyone thought we were gonna have to shut down the company, everybody. And, I just remember I was like, I had never cried that much. I'd, like, go into meetings and start weeping and bawling, and it was just, like, my heart and soul, and it just, again, I still hadn't unraveled at that point why this work meant so much to me. But then a miracle happened, and an investor kind of stepped in at the last second and saved the company, and
Mark Benioff from Salesforce, not too
yes!
shabby.
Oh my gosh, I'm so grateful to Mark, but I had met Mark at the World at Davos, and we had sat next to each other in meditation, and afterwards, we introduced ourselves, I told Mark about Embrace's work, he told me he had had a personal experience with a premature baby,
Mm.
and we were
Oh.
both just like, "Wow," and, the serendipity of sitting next to each other in that moment, and so we kept in
Mhm.
touch, and when this happened, I reached out to Mark, I sent him an email, I just told him everything that had happened, and I'll never forget, he responded just a few days later with, like, a single sentence in the email. He said, "Dear Jane, I will fund your company." And that was it. So I had gone from the high of thinking that we had finish this deal, right, to the low of
Right?
thinking we're gonna shut down the whole company back to this high of Mark putting us back on track. And that's
Is there a
within
piece
a week.
oh my god. Is there a piece of you that ever wishes you had just let it be and shut down the company then?
100%. 100% because then, the next because we didn't have a distributor after that, then it was just a scramble, and we never after that, when I reflected many years later with my co-founder, Rahul, he was like, "Yeah, that was the point where everything changed, like, everything was kind of on an upward trajectory until that point, and after that happened, we were just scrambling to figure out, how to what's the right business model, how do we get back on track, and we never found our answer, really, and so that was kind of like the beginning of the decline.
So, Jane, you said that was the moment when everything kinda changed. How so?
I think that that was the point that we had lost kind of the major distributor and what the business strategy would be from there on out. And so after that, it was just like a scramble to figure out, well, what is the strategy, right? And how do we make this financially sustainable? And we had to pivot a number of times because in the absence of a global distributor, we had already discovered that the economics didn't work out for us as
Mhm.
this tiny single product company to be manufacturing and distributing on our own. So we made a couple pivots. We tried to go down the road of those government contracts further to see how far we could get. That was something I never anticipated going into this was when you have a government as your primary customer, especially in countries like India, you have an election cycle, everything changes, right? So that was just something that we did not anticipate. And it took being there and going through this to realize like how much that affected our business. When you're a big
Mm.
company, you could absorb, those shocks. We're a single company in one country. And so there was that. Then we pivoted, we launched a consumer product that was like
Mhm.
based on our technology. We tried that in the US market. We ended up having a big manufacturing issue there, and meanwhile, I am just like exhausted. I was exhausted after the first 4 years of living in India. And so I'm like pushing, 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 becoming more exhausted. I feel like we're running out of options. At some point, I felt trapped. I felt so trapped. And I remember, and I talk about this moment in the book where, I would go do you know these sensory deprivation tanks, like flotation chambers?
I've never
Yeah.
done one, though. Sounds scary.
Yeah, so it's the one I went to anyway, it's kind of almost looks like this vault, right? And they're soundproof, light-proof, you're floating in warm, salty water that's human body temperature.
Huh.
And so it's just supposed to help you relax and you zone out and you lay there in this warm vat and you're floating and I would go in there to help me relax and it helped me like meditate a little bit. But I'd always keep the door ajar because it's pitch black in there, right? It's kind of scary. And one night I was floating and the little thing I'd use, a little teacup to keep the door ajar, had slipped out. And so I got up and I was so disoriented. It's pitch and I thought I was trapped in this flotation chamber. And I started screaming and kicking at the doors because it was also after hours. And so like the folks there had left. It was so scary, Mara. I was like completely freaked out. And I that to me was what feel like being doing the company at that point started to feel like that. That's what it felt like. Like that I was trapped and I had created this thing on my own and I loved it. So part of me loved it so much. And a part of me absolutely didn't want to be doing it anymore. And I knew like the cost of doing it, on my physical and mental health. At that point, I was also getting sick like every 4 to 6 weeks, I would get sick. My body was literally breaking down.
Yeah.
And yet I felt this both an obligation in retrospect, I could see it now as both like this obligation to our purpose and to our, the mission we had built and the product we built. But it was also because my identity was completely wrapped up in the company such that I didn't know who I was without it anymore.
And you had a breakdown.
Yeah. So shortly after that, we had to shut down the company. And, we had run out of money at that point. There was a potential acquisition offer that fell through, and so we shut down the company. So this is 10 years in now. 10 years in of, like, using every ounce of my life force to keep this thing afloat. And I had a breakdown. I just had a total breakdown. And it was at this point that I thought, I just need to get away from everything to find myself again. So I remember I wrote a letter to Embrace, a handwritten letter, as if Embrace were a person, and
Which
got
it
my
kind of
closure,
was, right?
which it
Yeah.
was. It was its own living entity. And so I wrote this letter, burned it, scattered the ashes in the ocean, and then I set off on the healing. And then I bought a one-way ticket to Indonesia because I had read Eat, Pray, Love, and that's where you go when you're doing something like this.
I was gonna ask you if that was intentional. So we didn't talk about the fact that you were a surfer
Yes.
and that surfing was very healing for you.
Mhm.
So you had this breakdown in which you were not in great shape, but
Yeah.
why was traveling halfway across the world or all the way across the world the solution in your mind?
Well, I think a couple things. One, surfing was so healing for me, and I had discovered surfing a few years earlier. And it was just this thing that was like pure play, and being in the ocean was so healing. And it really taught me many parts of kind of letting go of control, right? Because when you're out
Mhm.
there in the ocean, you can't control what happens. You can prepare yourself for it, but you can't control. And so it was slowly teaching me this act of surrender. And everything I was learning in surfing was so contrary to the life that I'd been living up until that point.
Mhm.
And so there were a couple reasons. One, I thought, well, I want to go surf in Indonesia. Indonesia is like the most iconic surf destination.
Huh.
And a friend of mine who had met surfing had also wanted to take some time off and go. So that was part of it. And then I also knew of it as kind of this very spiritual healing place, both from what I'd read and from friends. And I thought, that's the place to go. But it's just sometimes when you hit rock bottom, I think for me, I just needed a total change of scenery. I was so depressed, like, I couldn't be in the same place day in and day out. I was
Mhm.
ready to just, like, leave everything behind and see what I could find out there, but I knew was that I was totally broken, and I needed help, and I didn't know how to get that, and so the only thing I could think of was get away from everything.
I wanna fast forward a little bit. Um, I wanna close out the interview talking about your exploration of trauma in your body and then yourself through family
Yes.
systems work, because I think that the audience will find that really interesting. You really did go on a little eat, pray, love situation.
Yeah.
You went to Indonesia, you traveled, you did fall in love
Mhm.
several times.
Yeah.
Those relationships were not ultimately successful, right?
Mhm. Yeah, they're hard.
They were hard. What what got you back to the US, back to a place in Bessel van der Kolk's office?
Yes. So I went on all of these healing retreats, and I'll say each of them helped in their own way, right? And whether that was the psychedelics, the frog poison, like the 1,000 seminars I went to, all of them helped in their own way. But I would say they were they were mostly reframing my perspective, right? And shifting like a framework for me as opposed to getting to the core of what needed healing. And the core of what needed healing was the deeper trauma, which for so long I had buried and pushed away. And it was starting to resurface, and all these things I was doing, I was starting to come up, and I was starting to deal with it. But I think I still hadn't fully confronted it. And I certainly didn't understand the science of trauma. And so I came across Bessel's book. It was after a really rough breakup. And it was funny because at the point of entering this relationship, I had done the psychedelic journey. I'd met, my highest self, and I thought, I'm healed. I am healed. Like I really thought that. And I would go around telling people what my regiment was for like healing and getting, and I felt great, you know? And then I get into this relationship. I'm like, oh shit, no, I'm in kindergarten. Like I have learned nothing. And we all know how that is. Relationships are like your greatest teacher, right? But I was getting like triggered left, right, and center. And I won't go into the details of it, but it ended very, very badly. We'll just put it that way. And so coming out the other side of that, I felt really, really just down on myself because I had been through so much of the healing process already. And then to feel so low was tough. And so at the end of coming out of that relationship, I read The Body Keeps the Score, and I wept through so much of that book. You know, and it's an academic book, but it touched me so deeply because it gave me self-compassion, and it allowed me to see all of my behaviors through this new lens, and that lens being that trauma isn't something that happened in the past that just stays in the past. It actually rewires your brain and you rewires your nervous system such that you bring the past into the present. So often, many of us who do have trauma, we have heightened flight or flight responses, right? We're super hyper vigilant because our brains are wired for danger, right? And so that started to make sense. Okay, that's why I was so on edge, and intimacy in particular felt so scary for me, right? And so when I after I read that book, I just thought, wow, I want to work with Bessel van der Kolk.
Can I just ask you a
He's the guy.
question?
Yeah.
Do you think looking back, a lot of the themes on this show is how, our work is such a core part of our identity, and work is where we put things that are too hard to put other places.
Yeah.
When you started to explore this, how did you look at your sort of relationship? Again, we think of
Oh,
embrace,
yeah.
it's like it was a relationship, it was a being
It
in your life.
was.
Yeah, how did you look at that
Yeah.
did you look at that differently?
Oh, yeah. I could see how again, it's so multifaceted. It's not just one thing or another. But as I said,
Right.
part of me deeply believed in the mission. And there was another part of me where, because of the way I'd grown up, achievement became a survival strategy.
Yeah.
And I think that's true for many of us, right? Achievement becomes our way to earn love and worth. And so the things we can't deal with in our personal lives, we channel that into drive, perfectionism, overwork, right? And that's kind of what I believe has led to this burnout epidemic is that when we're traumatized, we feel the need, we don't feel enough. So we feel the need to go out there and prove our worthiness over and over and over again. Right. But the thing no one tells us is like nothing externally is going to prove that to you. The goalpost just keeps moving. You hit one milestone, you still feel empty, and you're like, "What's that about?" So you go for the next and the next and the next. And until you address the underlying cause, you're still gonna have that feeling of
Right, you're just
emptiness
I
and
mean,
brokenness.
the anxious achiever. You're
The
just
anxious achiever. Yep.
anxiously achieving.
Yep. Yep.
So so you landed in Bessel's office, which, by the way, is like you don't just find Bessel on Talkspace and be like, "Hey, dude, do you have an opening next Wednesday?" I mean, I would imagine.
Yes. That was yes. So I read the book, and then it turned out a friend of mine had done ketamine, training with him. And so I asked if she could reach out to him, and he agreed to a one-time consultation over Zoom. So I do this thing with him. I just loved him immediately, just who he is and what he stands for. And I felt very connected with him and I trusted him. And that's hard for me with therapists.
Hmm.
And so we finished that session, and I remember him saying to me at the end of it, and I said to him, Bessel, I've done all the things. Like, why do I still feel like this? And he said, you need one guide. You need one steady guide to help you through this process. And I was like, "Can you be that guide? Like, please?" And he was like, "No." He was like, "No, I'm retired. I'm not taking new clients. I'm
Yeah.
I'm too busy." But I was like, "Okay." But he says to me, I have this retreat at Esalen. Why don't you try to go to that instead?"
Right.
And that was just in a couple months. So I was like, yes. And I checked the retreat. It was completely full. It was oversubscribed. There was like 100-person wait list. And my time in India had taught me that anything is possible and no just means maybe. And so I found my way into that retreat. I met Bessel. A lot of interesting things happened at the retreat, learned a ton. And then after the retreat, I basically just kept following up with him and I'd check in
Oh,
with him and be like, hey, how about now? Can we do one more session? And he eventually, persistence is my specialty.
I'm very
So he
impressed. Wow.
he said no, like, probably the first 6 times, and then he eventually agreed to 1 more session, and we sat together, and we had this incredible session, and at the end of it, he asked me, "So, when do we meet again?" And I'm
Wow.
jumping up and down, and so I got on his schedule for 2 weeks after that, and then 2 weeks after that, and then pretty soon I was on his calendar for the rest of the year.
Amazing. That's like a therapy fairy tale. Uh, wow. But so 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 what did working with his specific approach to trauma teach
Yeah.
you? And was that the healing you needed?
I think the healing I needed, it had to come from so many different places, and ultimately for myself. But I would say it was interesting writing the book because in therapy, it's like the progress you make feels so slow.
Yeah.
And you often wonder, am I even making progress? I remember asking Bessel that at the end of every session. This is the anxious overachiever, right? End of every session, I'd be like, Bessel, am I going to be healed or what? And like, how long is this going to take? And he just very calmly say, yes, I do believe that you will be healed. And he really believed that. He's like, all trauma can be healed. And I didn't
Mm,
feel like because I'd been through years of this at that point. I thought maybe this is just something that's going to be with me, forever and, yeah, we could talk a little bit more about that later, but so I think when I wrote the book, I went back and I watched, like, dozens of our therapy sessions on because I'd filmed them.
wow. Really? That's
Mhm.
brave. Oh god, I could never do that.
Yeah, it's horrifying. It is so horrifying to watch your
Holy
own
crap.
therapy
I
sessions.
could never do that. Oh my
Yeah,
god.
and as I watched them, it was so fascinating because I started to see, A, what he was doing, and
Mhm.
B, my progress over time. I could
Mm.
really start to witness that. And I think the thing he really did the most, and I think other therapists honestly had tried this too, but there was something about that being that at that time in my life and with him in particular that I trusted him and was willing to go there. But he would simply like slow me down. And if I said something, because my tendency was to go over these like very traumatic things that had happened and just like go through them quickly, intellectualize them, move on to the next thing. And he would just have pause and take a breath. And on camera, he'd be like,
Wow.
and then it would force me to take a breath. Or he would look so sad as I said these stories. And then I would like have space to feel my own sadness.
He was co-regulating.
Yes.
That's what
And
he was doing.
yeah. And this is called empathetic resonance, right? When the therapist kind of mirrors and gives you the space to feel what you couldn't feel back then. And this is why, yeah, it was beautiful. And he just would look so concerned. And then I would be reminded that, yeah, that was really hard, you know? And it's why I don't think AI therapy, at least in its current format, could
Yeah.
ever replace human therapy when it comes to this kind of work. I mean, I think it's very helpful for accessibility, but for this kind of work, that human connection and mirroring and the empathetic resonance,
Yeah.
I
Well, and you're
didn't
with a
understand.
master.
Yeah, yes, that too, but there's something about it where I didn't understand the nuance of that until I went back and I really
Oh.
witnessed those videos, and I could
Yeah.
see just, like, what was happening in my own system, and so this is what I often say now, it's like, you can't think your way out of pain, right? For those of us who
Hmm.
are intellectuals, that's not how it works, you have to feel your way through it. And this is what the science of trauma shows. Trauma is stored in our limbic systems, our emotional bodies, not our neocortex, our thinking brains, right? So
Yeah.
that's the level at which you have to address it, which is why, for me anyway, cognitive behavioral therapy or talk therapy has not been as helpful. And it's why things, these other modalities like IFS, which we'll go to in a minute, and psychedelics and other, they kind of access these deeper parts of our brain.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's
Mm.
talk about IFS,
Yeah.
because it's different than probably well, I don't know. I've never had the honor of working with Bessel van der like, it was it very different, and how did you get there?
Well, Bessel had, I had learned about IFS probably at the retreat at Esalen. And then we did kind of some a version of that, some of that practice with Bessel. And then at one
Mhm.
point, Bessel introduced me to Deck Schwartz, who was the founder of IFS.
Of course you
I
did.
know I'm so lucky because I really got to work with the Avengers of trauma
I
support.
mean, I hope listeners are listening and being like I mean, my audience knows who these people are too,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah. Yeah. This is
th
also the anxious overachiever like approach to healing, right? So
I love it. I'm gonna work with the best in the world. Um, it's funny. I honor you. I think it's great.
yeah, so Bessel introduced me to Dick, and should I just like explain what IFS is a little bit
Sure,
or okay.
sure, go for it.
Yeah, so internal family systems is based on this concept that all of us contain a multitude of parts, right? So you have a part that's an anxious overachiever. You might also have a perfectionist part, a super critical part, control freak. I'm making all of this up, but there are all these parts within you, right?
Yeah,
And then these are protector parts. They come out to protect our what are called exiles in IFS. And these are the parts of us that carry difficult feelings like shame, loneliness, rejection, um, all of these things that might have been really difficult to handle when we were younger, especially. And so we develop these protective mechanisms so we don't have to feel that. We achieve so we don't have to feel like we're not enough or we're not worthy. Right. And so we have all these different parts. And then we have the self with a capital S. And that's the part of us that the core of our essence that is grounded, connected, curious, open, right? And when the self is in the driver's seat, I think we make kind of the wisest decisions for us and for those around us. But often the self is not in the driver's seats. It's one of these exiles or one of these protectors. In my book, I talk about one of my protectors. This is a firefighter in the IFS world. Was this very angry part of myself that would come out in intimate relationships. And one of my exes nicknamed this part of me Genghis Khan, you know?
wow,
So,
wow.
but the goal of IFS is to get to know each of these parts of yourself and to really build a relationship with them, to get curious about them, and to
Yeah,
instead of shame or banish them, to thank them for the role they've played in your life, right? And so that anxious overachiever part, thank you. You kept me safe. You helped me survive. Right?
yep,
And so when we do that and we honor those parts and then we start to understand like what are they afraid of? Right? And the goal is to kind of get to these deeper parts, these exiles, and to develop a relationship with them. Right. So they
mhm,
don't have to feel those ways. And so it's this beautiful practice of like, I would say self compassion in its most basic term is to just have that compassion for each of these parts of ourselves and to identify, why they are there, the role they are serving, and then to love the hell out of them as if they're children. And there's something beautiful when you acknowledge and love, something shifts.
yeah. I love it so much because, and I don't explicitly talk about AFS and the anxious achiever, but I do talk a lot about, really having a good relationship with that anxiety, with that overthinking, with that overwork, with that perfectionism, so that you can talk to it and you can say to it, are you serving me right now? Or do you need to
Hmm.
go away?
Yeah.
And I think that that's one of the things that's wonderful is you're not telling it, I want to cure you. I want to cure myself of you. I want to rid myself.
Yeah.
It's very much that this is a piece of me that I have to love no matter what,
Mhm.
which I think is really it's powerful.
It is powerful. It is powerful, and in the IFS framework, you even, take the core qualities of some of these parts, and you can assign a different role to that quality, right? So, like, for me, that hypervigilant
Mm,
part of myself, right, that's a protector. In one session, I remember I assigned that part the quality of being just the wise discerner. Right? So instead of
beautiful.
like yeah, instead of just that hyper vigilant, just like just having this wisdom to be discerning, right? And so there's just something really cool about this practice where again, you kind of it allows you to get into deeper levels of consciousness and to just acknowledge how complicated we all are, and that we all have these different parts and that each of these parts is not just all of who we are. And so that has been just like a groundbreaking practice for me. That's just my work. And once you learn the framework, you can kind of do it on yourself. So if a
Yeah.
situation comes up now, I'm like, okay, what parts of me are showing up and, how do I treat these parts with compassion? And then it kind of shifts everything.
Mm, that's so cool. And also, did you find parts of yourself that were different ages?
Yeah, yeah. A lot of the parts that show up are very, very young parts of ourselves, right? And so that's another cool part of that of this practice. And part of the practice you ask the part, hey, do you know how old I am now? And I love no, but it's just like these protective mechanisms are just so hardwired into us from such an early age that it's
Yeah.
hard to kind of, disentangle until we give it that time and space and awareness. Awareness
Yeah.
is everything.
So where are you now?
Uh
I almost
yes,
asked,
so
how
where
old are
am
you
I?
now? No.
Like in life or,
No.
what's
Right,
yeah.
right.
Where am I now? So let's see. Through much of this healing journey and even post my session with Bessel, I kept looking for the answers outside of me. Right.
Yeah.
Every healing modality, everything I could find, whether it was my purpose, my relationships, but other people, I wanted other folks to kind of bring that healing to me. And so at one point I just became absolutely obsessed with the idea of an ideal father. And this is through a practice called psychodrama, where you have people enact the roles of family members. You play out like what happened in reality, and then you pick other people to play the role of your ideal parents. And I'd seen this at Esalen and then tried it a couple times, but I became obsessed that if I just heard an ideal father's loving words and I could believe them, that was going to be the magic elixir that fixed everything. And so as I got to that's the end of the book, but not my healing journey because I think that's a lifelong journey. Um, but I had like orchestrated this whole perfect psychodrama where I handpicked an ideal father. I hand wrote like the lines I wanted him to say to me. I decided to make this a psychedelic experience. And I just kind of, orchestrated what I thought was the perfect no fail experiment here for me to hear those words. And so we got to this day and did all the things. And I had my friend come play the role of my ideal father, and he said all these lines to me. And I was like, I feel nothing. I still felt nothing. And I was so exasperated. And then I took the piece of paper and I took a picture of myself that was sitting on my desk, me at 5 years old. And I said all of those lines to myself. You are loved. You are worthy. I choose you. And I finally believed it and I felt it in my body. And it just was so amazing and mind blowing to me that everything I needed to hear, I thought I needed to hear from someone else had to come from me, right? And it took me going around the world and working with the best therapists in the world and doing just everything to finally come to this conclusion. And I had to do that. I had to take that journey to really arrive there. And now I know that all of the answers that we're seeking out there, they have to come from within us, right? And if we can't give that love to ourselves, no one else can.
We have to choose ourselves.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and it sounds so cliche in a way, but it's really not. It's really not. We have to keep working on that. And that's why I say now this relationship that we have with ourselves is the most important relationship of all because it shapes the way that you show up for everyone around you, right? And so for us in a professional context, to be a great leader, you have to have a great relationship with yourself. And you cannot create psychological safety for others if you don't have that within yourself.
No.
So this isn't imperative just as like nice, fluffy self-work, This is really important for everything.
Everything, and I think you and I can both reflect on, and I come from politics, so many of the people in politics who latched onto a candidate, I felt were seeking that ideal father. It was usually a man, unfortunately. Um, Freud, of course, wrote about it in Totem
Yeah.
and Taboo, right? Where I think that a lot of times we get into places at work where we are seeking those
Yes.
ideal parents for
Mhm.
ourselves, who will only love us enough. Something's gotta love
Yeah.
us enough if we work hard enough. You know, I
Right.
the last thing that my I won't actually say what he said, and it was in Yiddish, but, and he was on morphine, but the last thing my father said to me before he died was really cruel and mean, and
Mm.
so my son's gonna be 15, so that was over 15 years ago, and for so long, I was like, "Oh my god,
Mm.
the last thing my father said to me before he died was mean and
Mm.
diminishing and cruel and all the
Yeah.
things that I had experienced from him growing up. Am I gonna walk around as that little girl as that girl?" And then one day I was just sort of like, "Fuck it."
Mm. Mm.
No, I choose
Yeah.
no. You know what? He's dead. Oh god, I can't believe I'm saying this on my show, but, like, I can't hold that anymore. I have
Mm.
not been able to
Yeah.
do that with my mom. I still carry that. Um,
Mm.
but what you're
Mm.
saying is it's just resonant. It's just resonant,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and I think, coming back to, yeah, just what you were saying, it's like when we don't resolve those inner wounds, then we're leading from a place of fear and ego and
Mhm.
control,
And
right?
need
And need. Yes, the
right?
need for validation. The need for
I
validation.
like, everybody who comes, I was gonna say into my office, onto my Zoom, I think one of the things that we share is that hunger and that need,
Yes.
which makes us great and also
Yeah.
makes us fragile, not strong.
Yes. Yes. Yes, 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 absolutely, and I think this is really interesting to look at in what's happening in the world right now on so many levels, both politically, but
Yeah.
just from a technological, with AI coming into the picture and AI displacing jobs. And and this is a question I often ask, actually. I'll send you the article. I just got published in Time today, but it's like, who are we without our work and our productivity and our accomplishments? Right? And I think this is so important and something that this AI era is forcing us to ask.
Oh my okay, I have to read it. I just put in an article to HBR about anxiety and complicated emotions in AI.
Mm.
I feel so similarly. If we don't understand the emotions that AI brings up in us,
Yeah.
identity, worthiness, anxiety, mistrust, right? We can't lead others
Right.
to implement it.
Yeah.
So, oh, I can't wait to read your
Yeah.
article.
Yes, I'll send it to you. But it's like, to me, something I've really learned, I'm worth more than the sum of my achievements. Now I know that. I really know that. And that is resilience to me now, right?
Yes.
Because as you said, our identities are so fragile when they are predicated on what's external. And what if that goes away with AI or COVID or, all these things? We don't know what's going to happen externally. But when we can have that sense of worthiness and groundedness and self love, and that comes within us, that is the ultimate resilience.
Yes.
Because then it doesn't matter what happens outside, right? And that's what gives us the courage to take risks and fail. Because if you fail, you brush yourself off and you just keep going. And
Yep.
it didn't determine if you were worthy or not, right? And that's what I was feeling at the end of Embrace, at the end of that 10 years. I felt totally broken. I didn't have an identity anymore. I didn't know who I was. And coming out of the on the other side of that, I felt like, and where you asked where I am now, I know that I have a worthiness beyond anything external to me, right? And that I can always come back there no matter what's
Mhm.
happening outside. And that gives me the resilience to and the courage to write this book, to put out a really scary and vulnerable, my book's coming out in
It's
what, 3 days?
it's a very brave book. It's a very brave book, and I have to tell you, it's a really I hope every student at HBS reads it. So
Thank you. Thank you, but it's
Mm.
terrifying, so yeah, there are moments I woke up in, like, a panic, through this process being like, "Wait a minute, am I really putting this out there? Like, this is, like, really, really scary." But it's what my heart is calling me to do, and I'm doing it because I know it can help people,
Yeah,
and regardless of the outcome, I'm gonna be okay.
I know you will, Jane. I wanna thank you so much for your time and your insight, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on.